Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Duncan Williams, Director of the Shinso Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture. And I very much want to welcome you this afternoon to this event, Voices of Incarceration, the Enduring Impact of Executive Order 9066. As I think many of you know, this year is the 80th anniversary of that executive order. And we are so pleased this year to have a kind of day of remembrance of that forced removal and wartime incarceration by commemorating the publication of our professor here at USC, Susan Kamei's new book, When Can We Go Back to America? Today, we have some wonderful people who will be reading from the book, the voices of those who experienced forced removal and incarceration during World War II. They include Grace Shiba, Patty Honda Ara, Valina Hasu-Houston, Richard M. Watanabe, and Matthew Weasley. And so we have a tight schedule today where there will be readings, but also at the end, an opportunity to ask the author, Susan Kamei, questions about the book. And as well as all of the readers, any questions you may have, and we invite you at that time to put your questions into the Q&A of this Zoom webinar. And so with that, I'd like to hand things over to the main narrator for today, Grace Shiba, the Executive Director of the USC Asian Pacific Alumni Association. Please, Grace.
Thank you, Duncan, and welcome everyone. On February 19th, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, setting in the motion the incarceration of approximately 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, simply on the basis of their race. Although the incarceration occurred during the years of World War II, its root causes started decades before the war's outbreak, as the Chinese, the first Asian immigrants, faced intense prejudice and discrimination that the Japanese immigrants also later faced. And decades after World War II's military conclusion, the harmful impact of the incarceration, now considered unconstitutional, is still being felt today. As we mark the 80th anniversary of the issuance of Executive Order 9066, we call to memory the incarcerated Issei, the first generation immigrants from Japan who were legally precluded from citizenship. We call to honor their American-born offspring, the Nisei, and all those who endured the wartime imprisonment, along with those who fought on their behalf. We call to attention their words of fear and anguish, resolve and hope, to hear a message that is more relevant now, more than ever, to our current turbulent times. And we call to action those who will use their examples as motivation for working to protect civil liberties for all. Let's listen to them.
I'm always fearful that something like this might happen again. Not to me, maybe, but just in the world. I see the neo-Nazis. That scares me to death. And these ultra-conservatives. I think they could do something like this again. Not necessarily to me, but to whoever will be vulnerable. I think I'm more fearful of racism since that whole experience. Amy Akiyama Berger, incarcerated, age 8.
My parents came to America in the early 1900s. I think they would have become citizens if they were accepted. They had no plans to go back to Japan. Why would they come to a strange country against all odds if they weren't coming here to build better themselves and their children? But all the laws were made to keep them aliens in this society. Mitsuru Mitz Koshiyama, incarcerated, age 18.
My father cherished copies of the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution of the United States. And on our national holidays, he hung with great pride an enormous American flag on our front porch. Yoshiko Uchida, incarcerated, age 21.
We wanted to be accepted as Americans. We had no ties with Japan, and because of discrimination, we hated everything Japanese. I used to tell my mother, why can't we have bread like everybody else? Bacon and eggs in the morning? Why do we have to eat rice? Why do you have to read the Japanese paper? Why do I have to be foreign? Mitsuru Mits Koshiyama, incarcerated, age 18.
Due to the Immigration Act of 1924, alien land laws, racially restrictive covenants, and redlining and other prejudicial policies, the Issei and Nisei lived in a world of discrimination.
When I was in the Boy Scouts, I was about 11 or 12 years old. Our whole troop went swimming to the San Fernando Plunge, and they wouldn't let me in because I was the only non-white in that troop. So I sat on the bench, watched my fellow scouts swim, and that sort of ingrained a lot of hatred in me, I guess for discriminatory things. Frank Seishi Emi, incarcerated, age 26.
And then the day of infamy.
All of a sudden, 3 aircrafts flew right overhead. They were pearl gray with red dots on the wings, Japanese. I knew it was happening, and I thought my world had just come to an end. The Honorable Daniel Ken Inoue, age 17, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
I was attending St. Mary's Episcopal Church on the Sunday morning that the war broke out. When I reached home later that day, I found my mother in hysterics, crying and trying to pick up after the FBI had searched the house. "They took Papa," Mama shouted. "They chained him and numbered him like an animal." Mitsuo Mits Usui, incarcerated, age 25.
To the FBI, every radio owner was a potential saboteur. The confiscators were often deputies sworn in hastily during the turbulent days right after Pearl Harbor. And these men seemed to be acting out the general panic, seeing the sinister possibilities in the most ordinary household items. Flashlights, kitchen knives, cameras, lanterns, toy swords. Jean Toyo Wakatsuki Houston, incarcerated, age 8.
I remember yanking our pictures from our family album and burning them. We removed all Japanese calligraphy from our walls, even though we could not read them. In short, we tried to deny our very culture and origins. Minoru Min Tamaki, incarcerated, age 24.
As news of the destruction of Pearl Harbor spread, Americans reacted with shock and anger. The White House was inundated with telegrams and phone calls from people everywhere demanding revenge. From then on, anyone with Japanese face was viewed as an enemy, no matter they were US citizens. Their mail was censored, their fishing boats grounded, their food markets closed, their Japanese language press shut down, and all of their bank accounts frozen.
I felt like everybody and their uncle was looking at me, so I hurried home. When I got to Japantown, the place looked as though it was deserted. No one was out in the streets, and some of the stores were still open. And as soon as I got home, my parents said, "Stay home, we don't want you to be wandering around." And as I looked out the window, I could see extra police cars in the area. And suddenly I began to see, I guess they could either have been detectives or FBI agents. I suddenly felt insecure. Katsumi Thomas Tom Kawaguchi, incarcerated, age 21.
My eldest brother was a practicing dentist in Gardena, having just graduated from USC Dental School in 1941. He volunteered for the US Army immediately after Pearl Harbor, but was turned down. He was told that the US Army did not need any Japanese American dentists. Mary Sakaguchi Oda, incarcerated, age 22.
December 15, 1941, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox claimed in a press conference that Japan was enlisting agents and sympathizers from within the United States to encourage in fifth column espionage to prepare for the second all-out attack on the California coast. His comments energized longstanding prejudice against persons of Japanese ancestry from some of California's most prominent industries, especially the large agricultural organizations that wanted to eliminate Japanese American farmers from the US market entirely.
Cries began to sound up and down the coast that everyone of Japanese ancestry should be taken into custody. For years, the professional guardians of the Golden West had wanted to rid their land of the yellow peril, and the war provided an opportunity for them to push their programs through. Monica Kazuko Itoe Sane, incarcerated, age 23.
Under the door, the following note was left. "This is a warning. Get out. We don't want you in our beautiful country. Go where your ancestors came from. Once a Jap, always one. Get out." As we became increasingly the target of blind hate, our government failed to come to our aid. Indeed, the government joined in the hysteria by overreacting, rounding up supposed enemy agents, and above all, keeping silent about the increasing antagonism against all Japanese Americans. Minoru Mintamaki, incarcerated, age 24.
We couldn't open the doors of our house because we were simply afraid. Haruyuki Jim Matsuoka, incarcerated, age 7.
Just before I evacuated from West Los Angeles, there was a blackout of that area. Searchlights crisscrossed the sky to locate Japanese planes. This fake attack was instigated to further arouse the public's hatred for the Japanese people. There has been no authenticated proof that any planes had crossed the Pacific Ocean at that time. Elizabeth Aiko Takahashi Nishikawa, incarcerated, age 31.
Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt, a Jap's a Jap. It makes no difference whether he's an American citizen or not. I have no confidence in their loyalty whatsoever.
On the West Coast, General J.L. DeWitt favored mass evacuation of the Japanese. We suspected that pressures from economic and political interests who would profit from such a wholesale evacuation influenced this decision. Monica Kazuko Itoe Sone, incarcerated, age 23.
February 14, 1942, Carl Benzetson, War Department. In the war in which we are now engaged, racial affinities are not severed by migration. The Japanese race is an enemy race and white, while many second and third generation Japanese born on United States soil, possessed of United States citizenship, have become Americanized. The racial strains are undiluted. It, therefore, follows that along the vital Pacific coastal frontier, over 112,000 potential enemies of Japanese extraction are at large today, organized and ready for concerted action at a favorable opportunity. The very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066. By virtue of the authority vested in me as President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I hereby authorize and direct the Secretary of War and the military commanders to prescribe military areas from which any or all persons may be excluded.
After the president signed Executive Order 9066, we all had these meetings in Little Tokyo in Los Angeles. I went to one of them. There were some people who wanted to protest and others who wanted to wait and see what the government was going to do. There was a big debate over whether we should go quietly and cooperate with the government or whether everybody should go their own way, wherever they could. Sueko Su Kunitomi Embre, incarcerated, age 19.
We've been led to believe that if we cooperated with the Army in the projected mass movement, the government would make every effort to be as helpful and humane as possible. Cooperation as indisputable demonstration of loyalty might help to speed our return to our homes. Mike Masaru Masaoka, age 26, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt, commanding U.S. Army. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry, all persons both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated from the above designated area. The size and number of packages limited to that which can be carried by the individual or family group.
My history teacher told me, "Don't worry, Yoshio. You are an American and the Constitution will protect you from being forcefully removed." The next week, I told him I had orders to evacuate. He was stunned. Yoshio Yosh Nakamura, incarcerated, age 17.
Henry went to the control station to register the family. He came home with 20 tags, all numbered 10710, tags to be attached to each piece of baggage and one to hang from our coat lapels. From then on, we were known as family number 10710. Monica Kazuko Itoe Sone, incarcerated, age 23.
We put up a sign in our window reading, living room sofa and chair for sale. Without a sensible scheme in our heads and lacking the practical judgment of my father, the three of us packed frantically and sold recklessly. We felt desperate as the deadline approached. Our only thought was to get the house emptied in time, for we knew the Army would not wait. Yoshika Uchida, incarcerated, age 21.
On the day before the posted evacuation date, There was a line of cars in our driveway extending out about another 200 yards in both directions, waiting for their turn to come to our house to see what they could get from us for a small fraction of its worth or nothing. Most of the people were strangers, but some were people we thought were our friends. One man wanted to buy our pickup truck. My father had just spent $125 for a new set of tires and tubes and a brand new battery. Our friend bought, and I use the words friend and bought facetiously, the machine we used to spray crops for $15. We had only a few weeks earlier purchased it for about $100. The man told my father that he might as well take the $15, otherwise he'd be back the next day and pick it up for nothing. Hiroshi Kamei, incarcerated, age 14.
One Issei, Mr. Iwasa, committed suicide. Mary Tsuruko Takazaku Tsukamoto, incarcerated, age 27.
At the peak of the strawberry season, the military descended upon us. It was incredible. The all-important berry crop we had worked the entire year to produce was to be abandoned. Each year, we were deep in debt merely to make it until harvest time. Every crate we sold now meant paying back the debts we had accumulated through the winter months to survive. Reluctantly, we were now forced to leave with debts to dishonor our name. More serious was the fact that we were penniless as we began a frightful journey to destinations unknown. Nearly 500 families were removed from the Florin area. Florin never recovered from this ordeal. The community we remembered died on May 29th, 1942. I kept pondering, why? What had we done? Why was this happening to us? Why? Mary Tsuruko Dakuzaku Tsukamoto, incarcerated, age 27.
So much was left behind, but the most valuable thing I lost was my freedom. Teru Watanabe, incarcerated, age 28.
As an impressionable 12-year-old in 1942, I learned about the US Constitution and what it meant. I felt that I could count on our government. The remotest thing in the minds of our family was to be incarcerated under some emotional decision contrary to the Constitution. I could not believe at the time that this was happening to us. Alan Minoru Hida, incarcerated, age 13.
We kept wondering whether anybody was going to protest. We sat around saying, they can't do this to us. We're American citizens. Sue Konitomi Embry, incarcerated, age 19.
3 individuals who deliberately refused to accept some or all of the orders were Minoru Yasui of Portland, Oregon, Gordon Hirabayashi of Seattle, Washington, and Fred Korematsu of San Leandro, California, near San Francisco. They would be convicted on criminal charges for not complying with the exclusion and detention orders.
I grew up in Oregon and believed myself an American, equal to all Americans. If we believe in America, if we believe in equality and democracy, if we believe in law and justice, then each of us, when we see or believe errors are being made, has an obligation to make every effort to correct them. Minoru Minyasui, incarcerated, age 25.
This order for the mass evacuation of all persons of Japanese descent denies them the right to live. I'm objecting to the principle of this order, which denies the rights of human beings, including citizens. Gordon Kiyoshi Hirabayashi, age 24, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
My older brother arranged a meeting in Tanforan. I asked whether I should go ahead and fight the case or not. Some people said, we're in here now, why make it worse? And other people said, it's up to you. They left everything up to me because I'm fighting the case and they're not. So I decided to go ahead and see the thing through. Fred Toyosaburo Korematsu, age 22, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Into the wasteland.
Large headlines in local papers clamored, make the Japs suffer, let them hurt and be miserable, castrate them, sterilize them, ship them out, get rid of them. Minoru Minyasui, incarcerated, age 25.
We were filled with fear. We weren't sure that they weren't going to just take us out into the desert and shoot us. We had no idea what to expect. Aiko Yoshinaga Hersig, incarcerated, age 17.
Some people were actively stating that the government was going to make us all starve to death. Diichi Sato, incarcerated, age 47.
Newspaper photographers with flashbulb cameras pushed busily through the crowd. One of them rushed up and asked a young couple and their little boy to step out and stand by the door of the Greyhound bus for a shot. They were reluctant, but the photographers were persistent, and at length, they got out of the bus and posed, grinning widely to cover their embarrassment. We saw the picture in the newspaper shortly after, and the caption underneath it read, "Japs, good-natured about evacuation." Monica Kazuko Itoi Sone, incarcerated, age 23.
The journey, the trip itself, was lousy. We didn't know where we were going. They never told us where we were going. They never told us, again, we didn't know what the charges were. Why were we going? We're American citizens. Chizu Kitano Iyama, incarcerated, age 21.
To get to Camp Harmony, we were all herded like livestock on the army trucks. The ride was cold, dirty, crowded, and humiliating. Some of the rednecks in the crowd of onlookers called us derogatory terms. Shuzo Chris Kato, incarcerated, age 16.
At the sight of the Manzanar camp, our hearts sank to a new low. Even some of the soldiers who escorted us down couldn't believe what they saw. Some had tears in their eyes as they left us. Paul Tsutomu Otaki, incarcerated, age 18.
At the entrance of Tanfran stood two lines of troops with rifles and fixed bayonets pointed at the evacuees as they walked between the soldiers to the prison compound. Overwhelmed with bitterness and blind with rage, I screamed every obscenity I knew at the armed guards, daring them to shoot me. William Masayoshi Koshiyama, incarcerated, age 21.
I was too young to understand, but I do remember the barbed wire fence from which my parents warned me to stay away. I remember the sight of the high guard towers. I remember soldiers carrying rifles, and I remember being afraid. I remember women weeping as our bundles were piled onto trucks. I remember armed guards herding us about, and I remember the fear that I felt. I remember waking up in the middle of some nights and hearing my parents and a few of their friends in hushed discussions. Sometimes my mother would be crying, and my father always seemed deeply worried. I was too young to understand what they were talking about, but my childhood memories of fear, anxiety, and tension are vivid and very real. George Hosato Take, incarcerated, age 5.
We walked into stall 50 and dropped our things inside the entrance. The place was in semi-darkness. Light barely came through the dirty windows on either side of the entrance. Spider webs, horsehair, and hay had been whitewashed with the walls. Huge spikes and nails stuck out all over the walls. A 2-inch layer of dust covered the floor, but on removing it, we discovered that linoleum, the color of redwood, had been placed over the rough, manure-covered boards. Mine Okubo, incarcerated, age 30.
We began to realize what it meant to stand in line in front of the latrine. For us, women and children, it was just a shock. The latrine was smelly and it was dirty. In the shower, the water poured over you and there were no partitions, and it was so cramped that we almost touched each other. It was very humiliating. Mary Tsuruko Dakuzaku Tsukamoto, incarcerated, age 27.
The heat of Fresno in the summer melted the tar from the roof onto our beds. The asphalt floors of our crowded rooms melted and our beds and chairs sank. We became ill from the lack of salt as we perspired from morning till night. We ate in noisy mess halls, several hundred waiting in line in 3 shifts. We ate hurriedly, perspiration dripping from our elbows. Mary Tsuruko Dakazaku Tsukamoto, incarcerated, age 27.
The terrible emotional drain of camp life was responsible for more permanent damage than the harsh physical surroundings. Humiliation, anger, frustration, degradation, guilt, boredom, isolation, fear, anxiety, and uncertainty were my constant companions. It was as though time had frozen and me with it. I had no future. We had no future. Haru Michida Isaki, incarcerated, age 28.
Even as the Japanese Americans were being ousted from their West Coast homes and despairing for their futures in the assembly centers, the U.S. Army and the War Relocation Authority were busy identifying potential sites for what it would call relocation centers. Out of the 300 sites, the WRA selected 10, all on remote and inhospitable lands: Rower, Jerome, Tule Lake, Granada, which came to be known as Amachi, Topaz, Minidoka, Heart Mountain, Colorado River, which became known as Poston, Gila River, and Manzanar.
July 30th, 1942. The radio announced this morning that General DeWitt had ordered the clearance of all assembly centers. Everyone got greatly excited, and the news spread around camp like wildfire. There's an increasing tension among the people. Charles Kikuchi, incarcerated, age 26.
There were now administration bulletins on such matters as baggage preparation, the approximate dates of the movement, the conduct on trains. No one knew exactly when and where the relocation would begin, but it was not long before we received a notice telling us to be packed and ready. Everywhere there was a stir of final preparation, of packing and crating. Scrap lumber furniture and shelves had to come down, and the precious tags bearing the family identification number had to be brought out of safekeeping. Mine Okubo, incarcerated, age 30.
The trip was a nightmare that lasted 2 nights and a day. The train creaked with age. It was covered with dust, and as the gas lights failed to function properly, we traveled in complete darkness most of the night, reminding me of the blackout trains in Europe. All shades were drawn, and we were not allowed to look out the windows. Many became train sick. The children cried from restlessness. At one point on the way, a brick was thrown into one of the cars. Mine Okubo, incarcerated, age 30.
Bringing new meaning to gaman.
We disembarked in the middle of the desert, and many evacuees sat on their belongings dumped along the side of the railroad tracks and wept. It was a desolate feeling. No trees or greenness about, only sagebrush, rocks, and the shimmering of the heat of the desert. We were transported by army trucks to yet uncompleted barracks over raw dirt roads, choking in the dust kicked up by the trucks in front of us. And dust permeated everything. It got into our nostrils, our eyes, our clothes, our bedding, our food, our shoes. And as we perspired, we became mud dolls with rivulets of sweat streaking our faces, arms, and bodies. Minoru Min Yasui, incarcerated, age 25.
I stood bewildered, glaring at the hot, dusty desert, wondering how we could survive. Chioko Morita, incarcerated, age 14.
How would you like to live in one room with your father and your mother, your sisters and your brothers, all around, your aunts in the next room, all knowing exactly what you do every minute of the time? Chizuko Chizu Kitano Iyama, incarcerated, age 21.
The winters are still cold in Heart Mountain, but not as cold as the winters in the hearts of men. Yoshido Yosh Kudomiya, incarcerated, age 19.
When the rains came in roar, we could not leave our quarters. The water stagnated at the front steps. The mosquitoes that festered there were horrible, and the authorities never had enough quinine for sickness. Roar was a living nightmare. Masako Betty Fujisaki Matsuo, incarcerated, age 16.
A Jim Crow system existed in the camp. The Caucasians lived on the south side of the administration building. They were housed in white painted structures. They had the cooling system for the terrible heat of the desert summer. They had the heating system, which made their life comfortable. The Caucasians went to a dining hall. They were served by the inmates who waited on them. Sumptuous meals were served to them compared to what we were fed. Elizabeth Aiko Takahashi Nishikawa, incarcerated, age 31.
Sports were real important. I remember we had to buy our own baseballs and basketballs from the Sears catalog and our own uniforms and set up our own league. We had championship playoffs. It's funny, but I think sports were one of the key factors that kept people from going astray or feeling dissatisfied in camp. If it weren't for those athletic leagues, I think there would have been more dissension. Jack Shigeru Matsuoka, incarcerated, age 17.
5 of us girls from the block in Heart Mountain took passes to go into this little town in Cody, Wyoming. We were around 15 years old. We thought, oh, this is great. We're going to go out there and have a soda. We got on the bus and everybody is staring at us. I mean, like we're something from Mars. We started giggling and laughing throughout the whole thing. We went into a drugstore and sat down, ready to order. Nobody would come. Finally, they brought out this sign that says, "We don't serve Japs." We looked at that. We didn't know what to do. We said, we didn't want anything anyway. We were devastated. All we did the rest of the day was wait for the bus so we could get back to camp. And even after we got back, we laughed. We made a big joke about it. We didn't know how to deal with it. Lillian Reiko Sugita Nakano, incarcerated age 14.
At my first opportunity in March 1943, I left camp to attend school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. On my way, I was harassed by MPs checking for my ID number and leave clearance pass many times. I even got spat upon by some of the passengers on the train. When I arrived in Milwaukee, I discovered the engineering school has misrepresented themselves and only wanted my money. Then I moved to Chicago, Illinois, and with the help of the American Friends Service Committee, I found a job in a box factory. I worked there for 3 months. Then I tried to enroll in a school of engineering at the University of Illinois, but when I told them I was an evacuee from camp, they refused my admission. I told them of my WRA clearance, but my protests went unheeded. Finally, I was accepted at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor because I listed my Chicago address and did not mention internment. Richard Dick Nishi, incarcerated age 21.
When a human being is placed in captivity, survival is the key. We developed a very negative attitude towards authority. Our minds started to function like any POW or convicted criminal. For so many of our Issei parents who were used to being active, it was a slow process of deterioration, degeneration, and dying. It could be seen on their faces, the hopelessness, uncertainty. Many with only a few good years left lost their will to survive. Kenyon Noguchi, incarcerated age 14.
A little over a month before the Pearl Harbor attack on November 1, 1941, the Army launched the Military Intelligence Service Language School in an abandoned aircraft hangar in the San Francisco Presidio. The first class included 58 Nisei soldiers who had Japanese language skills. A year later, the MIS had quietly scouted out 167 young men from the 10 war relocation centers to leave camp for MIS training.
On the one hand, Japanese Americans were condemned for having the linguistic and cultural knowledge of Japanese. And on the other hand, the knowledge they had was capitalized on and used as a secret weapon by the Army intelligence. Mark Yutaka Murakami, incarcerated age 32.
Meanwhile, the 100th Battalion from Hawaii was amassing a remarkable record during its training at Camp McCoy. On January 28, 1943, Secretary of War Henry Stimson announced the organization of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, an all-Japanese American volunteer unit that would report to white officers. Not quite 1 year earlier, Roosevelt had signed Executive Order 9066, and now the same president was saying Americanism is not and never was a matter of race or ancestry. Many parents saw no point in having their sons risk their lives in defense of a democratic government that was holding them captive.
A recruiting team came to the center and a printed form was submitted to all men of military age. At the same time, the War Relocation Authority decided to conduct a general registration of all persons in the camp 17 years of age or older. The registration form was long and complicated. The questions were difficult to understand and answer. Center-wide meetings were held and the anti-administration rabble-rousers skillfully fanned the misunderstandings. Mine Okubo, incarcerated age 30.
There were friends fighting against friends, brothers fighting against brothers. It was terrible. And people asked, why do you want to volunteer? I just said, I don't understand what the argument is. Our country is being attacked and I want to defend it. It's that simple. They looked at me and said, you must have holes in your head. Katsumi Thomas Tom Kawaguchi, incarcerated age 21.
I was a resistor as a matter of principle. After what my government did to us, I could not be in the military and kill others because they were in a different uniform. This was beyond my feelings of humanity. I couldn't do it. We lost our individual identities. We were given a family number by our government, but the draft board put my personal name on my draft letter. I had to answer it. If nobody else agreed with my decision, so be it. I'm not willing to kill nor die until my government squared things with me. Yoshito Yosh Kudomiya, incarcerated, age 19.
The volunteers who live in imprisonment joined the volunteers from Hawaii in the 442nd to train at Camp Shelby. The cultural divide between the Katonks from the mainland and the Buddha heads from the islands threatened the ability of the unit to succeed. In an attempt to bring the two groups together, 442nd Commander Colonel Charles W. Pence sent a contingent of Buddha heads to visit the Jerome and Warwick camps. The fun-loving soldiers from Hawaii were immediately sobered by the camp environment of barbed wire, machine gun towers, and guards with rifles and bayonets. They began to regard the soldiers who had volunteered from these conditions with new respect. They united behind the motto, "Go for broke."
Overnight, the situation in Camp Shelby changed because the word went out like wildfire. The experiment worked. The next day, you thought you were visiting a new regiment. We were blood brothers. Daniel Dan Ken Inoue, age 17 when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
The 100th 442nd RCT became the most decorated military unit for its size and length of service in all of U.S. military history. Its heroics included the rescue of the Lost Battalion from Texas.
After 4 days of fierce fighting, we are still pushing to get to the trapped battalion. The cost has been high. I admire the courage and the discipline of our loyal men. They take their orders in stride without complaint and went into the volley of fire with one spirit and one mind. My heart weeps with our men, especially with those who gave all. Never has any combat affected me so deeply as has this emergency mission. I'm probably getting soft, but to me, the price is too costly for our men. I feel this way because the burden is laid on the combat team when the rest of the 141st Battalion, 36th Division, is not forced to take the same responsibility. In spite of my personal lamentations, our men are facing their enemy with courage that comes from the heart. When we complete this mission, which we will today or tomorrow, we will have written with our own blood another chapter in the story of our adventures in democracy. Masao Yamada, America's first Japanese-American chaplain, age 34, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
I'm absolutely certain all of us were well aware that we were being used for the rescue because we were expendable. Daniel Dan Ken Inoue, age 17 when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
And General Dahlquist called the regiment out for our retreat parade to commend us personally. He's reported to have said to the commanding officer, "Colonel, I ask that the entire regiment be present for this occasion. Where are the rest of your men?" And Colonel Charles W. Pence, as bone weary as any dog facing the outfit, replied, "Sir, you are looking at the entire regiment. Except for 2 men on guard duty at each company, this is all that is left of the 442nd Combat Team." And there we were, cooks, medics, band, and a handful of riflemen, a ragged lot at rigid attention without a single company at even half its normal strength. General Dahlquist looked at us for a time. Twice he started to speak and choked on the overpowered feelings that took hold of him. And in the end, all he could manage was an emotional, "Thank you, men. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." And the saddest retreat parade in the history of the 442nd was over. Daniel Dan Ken Inoue, age 17, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945. The war in Europe was finally ended. Japan was now fighting alone. In the meantime, Minoru Yasui, Gordon Hirabayashi, Fred Korematsu, and Mitsue Endo were continuing their fight to the Supreme Court.
Ancestry is not a crime. Gordon Kiyoshi Hirabayashi, age 22, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
But the US government was engaging in a cover-up, suppressing and destroying intelligence evidence that refuted the Army's claims to justify their mass removal that the Japanese Americans were engaging in sabotage.
I picked out a box in the National Archives that said Korematsu v. United States. I found a memo, and it was written by a government Justice Department lawyer named Edward Ennis to the Solicitor General of the United States, Charles Fahey. And in that memo to Fahey, who was preparing to argue the Korematsu case before the Supreme Court in 1944, Ennis said, "We are in possession of information that shows that the War Department's report on the internment is a lie. And we have an ethical obligation not to tell a lie to the Supreme Court, and we must decide whether to correct that record. And looking at that document, I still remember vividly thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a smoking gun. Here's a lawyer for the government about to argue before the Supreme Court saying we're telling lies to the Supreme Court. The memo said, this may approximate the suppression of evidence. As a lawyer, I realized this is dynamite. Peter H. Irons, civil rights attorney, legal scholar, and professor emeritus of political science at the University of California, San Diego.
On June 21st, 1943, the Supreme Court ruled against Yasui and Hirabayashi, and on Monday, December 18, 1944, the court also affirmed Korematsu's conviction, upholding the constitutionality of the mass exclusion.
President Roosevelt wanted the decision in favor of the government. He apparently passed the word to one of his appointees that it would be a good thing for the war effort if there was a unanimous decision. Well, I guess the Constitution had gone to war too. Gordon Kiyoshi Hirabayashi, age 22, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
In 1944 in Detroit, I received a letter that we had lost in the Supreme Court, and I just couldn't believe it. When I found out I lost my decision, I thought I had lost my country. Fred Toyosaburo Korematsu, age 22, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
The Supreme Court also ruled in ex parte endo that the federal government could no longer detain loyal American citizens against their will. The long-term incarcerees would now face the challenges of resettling into an uncertain future.
The only work that we could find was as servant-type laborers, as gardeners, houseboys, busboys, janitors, dishwashers, and so forth. Mom worked in the fish cannery on Terminal Island until she was in her 70s. My father wasn't able to work, and my mother and father died very sad and unfulfilled. Their chance to achieve their dreams and goals had been crushed by the unconstitutional and illegal actions of the United States government, and by the overreaction and paranoid inhuman creation of detention camps. In 1955, my father, feeling he was a failure and a burden to his children, died of a broken heart. Masani Mas Fukai, incarcerated aged 15.
I had been discharged from the hospital and was on my way home for good. Naturally, I wanted to look my spruced up best, and a day or so before the troop ship left, I went to this barbershop in one of the towns ringing San Francisco and got as far as the door. "Are you Chinese?" the man had said to me. I looked past him at the 3 empty chairs. The 2 other barbers were watching us closely. "I'm an American." "Are you Chinese?" "I think what you want to know is where my father was born. My father was born in Japan. I'm an American." Deep in my gut, I knew what was coming. "Don't give me that American stuff," he said swiftly. "You're a Jap, and we don't cut Jap hair." I wanted to hit him. I could see myself. It was as though I was standing in front of a mirror. There I stood in full uniform, the new captain's bars bright on my shoulders, 4 rows of ribbons on my chest, the combat infantry badge, the distinguished unit citation, and a hook where my hand was supposed to be. And he didn't cut Jap hair. To think that I had gone through the war to save his skin, and he didn't cut Jap hair. I said, I'm sorry for you and the likes of you." And I went back to my ship. Daniel Dan Ken Inoue, age 17, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. World War II had finally come to an end. Only 10 people had been convicted of spying for Japan. All of them were white.
Commencement promises the beginning of a bigger life, a life which holds greater responsibilities, new experiences, and a deeper significance in living. Can we ever forget our first year of school in Poston? Classes were held in unimpressive black tar-papered barracks. The rooms were crowded with students, but empty of the barest essentials of a school. We hear the urgent call for volunteers to help complete our school. We remember the quick response of students, teachers, and parents. Those willing, determined workers can justly say, "We helped build this, our school." We see rows of adobe buildings, some of them still incomplete. In reminiscing about our final year at Parker Valley High School, we can see the great accomplishments we achieved in leadership, scholarship, and citizenship. The prom, our senior ball, our class play, our senior day, and our banquet were the result of initiative, determination, and diligence. 2.5 years ago, the members of the class of 1945 were attending schools in 25 different communities along the Pacific Coast. Tonight, we are gathered here as one class. With the passing of the summer and winter of 1945, each of us will find himself in a former hometown or in an entirely new community. We may be in Chicago or in New York, Milwaukee or Kansas City, in San Diego or any other city. Wherever we may encounter hardships and misunderstandings, as we try to solve our difficulties, our lives may become turmoil. During trying times such as these, we will recall, happiness was attained only through real understanding between one another. Misako Miki Mayumi Honda, salutatorian, Parker Valley High School, Poston 3.
Righting a great wrong.
Sunset children have asked, why did you let it happen? Why didn't you fight for your civil rights? Why did you go without protests to the concentration camps? Yoshiko Uchida, incarcerated, age 21.
The most difficult problem for me to overcome was the anger and bitterness which has gradually surfaced over the past 39 years. Because of the humiliation and shame, I could never tell my 4 children my true feelings. I did not want my children to know the feeling of rejection by their fellow Americans. I wanted them to feel that in spite of what was done to us, this was still the best place to live in the world. Mary Sakaguchi Oda, incarcerated, age 22.
The government owes compensation for the loss of regard for the principle of equal justice under the law for all people upon which this country was founded. Masani Mas Fukai, incarcerated, age 15.
To me, the signing of the redress bill was final recognition of our loyalty to the United States. Those of us who fought in the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and the Military Intelligence Service, we feel now that our efforts at the battlefront, giving up our lives and being wounded and maimed and disabled, all this was for a great cause, great ideals, that is, to remove the one big blot on the Constitution. Spark Masayuki Matsunaga, age 25, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
How would you answer Americans who ask, did it really happen? Why hadn't I learned about it in school in the past 30 years? They must have been guilty of something for the government to imprison them for nearly 3 years. For 44 years, we have lived within the shadows of this humiliating lie. There was never a military necessity to exclude us, yet we were presumed guilty and condemned. All Americans were betrayed when the Constitution was violated. Mary Tsuruko Dakuzaku Tsukamoto, incarcerated, age 27.
Allyship. The 9/11 attacks raised striking parallels to the Pearl Harbor bombing.
There is no question that right after September 11th, they were saying, take all these Arab Americans and Muslims and put them in camp. I don't believe this. What am I hearing? On September 12th, there was a cabinet meeting with members of the Democratic and Republican leadership. And towards the end of the meeting, Congressman David Bonnier from Michigan said, Mr. President, we have a very large population of Arab Americans in Michigan, and they're very concerned about what they're hearing on radio, television, and reading in the newspaper about some of the security measures that might be taken relating to transportation. And the president said, David, you're absolutely correct. We are also concerned about this, and we want to make sure that what happened to Norm in 1942 doesn't happen today. Norm Yoshio Mineta, incarcerated, age 10.
As soon as bayonets and guns were pointed at them, the Issei and Nisei realized they were powerless to change the political dynamic. Too few people spoke up for them when they couldn't speak for themselves. What we can learn from the proponents of redress, organizers of Tsuru for Solidarity, and supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement is the critical necessity of creating awareness of the plights of others and building understanding and empathy so that we can overcome our differences and work together toward a more equitable and just society. It is vitality important to join forces in the public discourse to stop prejudicial policies and practices, to prevent them from happening again, and to reconcile from our past. The voices of the Issei and Nisei who experienced the wartime incarceration are falling silent with the passage of time. It is up to the descendants, the Sansei, Yonsei, and even Gosei, as well as future generations, along with other allies, to know their stories and hold the government accountable under the Constitution. As Tule Lake incarceree Joe Matsuzawa told his granddaughter, Kara, "Don't forget this event. It could happen to you too."
I learned we were a group of people who had no power because we had no representation in Congress or in any governmental agency. And if that we really wanted to get our voices heard, then we had to be an active participant in a democracy. Sueko Su Kunitomori Embre, incarcerated age 19.
I encourage everyone to get involved in your towns or cities' local civic affairs to get a taste of what you could accomplish when you're part of the political discourse. Our municipalities, cities, counties, states, and our whole country need you to be in the room where decisions are made on important policies and practices. My fervent wish is that you will be motivated to make real the words we say when we salute the flag, with liberty and justice for all. Secretary Norman Y. Mineta.
Can we, the graduating class of Amachi Senior High School, still believe that America means freedom, equality, security, and justice? Do I believe this? Do my classmates believe this? Yes, with all our hearts, because in that faith, in that hope is my future, our future, and the world's future. Marion Tsuruko Konishi Takehara, incarcerated age 16.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our readers and our narrator, Grace, Valina, Matt, Watt, Patty, and the Ito Center, Shannon and Duncan Williams, Professor Williams, for this opportunity to bring to life some of the voices of the incarceration. If you think of the number of 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry that fell under the jurisdiction of the War Relocation Authority, there are 120,000 different stories. In our quest to try to tell the story to the public and remember what had happened, it's easy to forget that there were individual decisions that had to be made, and in every situation, everyone had to reconcile what they were going to do with the decisions in their lives. The day that we think of as Day of Remembrance, while it falls on February 19, is as one day of an action of President Roosevelt. It's really our opportunity to think of the whole history of the Asian American immigrant experience, and particularly what kicked off the experiences that our Issei pioneers faced when they first arrived and throughout their lives, and what the legacy is now in terms of how we look at issues of national security and the impact on civil liberties of marginalized communities. And so with that, we are grateful that we've had this chance to come together and have this kind of remembrance of the individuals that actually experienced incarceration through friends and descendants. For us, it's deeply personal to be able to read these words. And thank you all for joining with us in experiencing this. There are a couple questions in the chat, and we do have a few minutes to take others. One question is about why German and Italian Americans were also not put into detention, and also why the Japanese and Americans in Hawaii were not similarly forcibly removed. These are big questions, and there's a lot to the answers, but insofar as the Germans and the Italians are concerned, the two large reasons were that the Germans and Italians were able to become naturalized citizens. And so over the time that those immigrants were in the United States, that came to the United States at an earlier time than the Asians, they were able to become naturalized citizens. And then of course their children were born as American citizens. So by the time World War II came about, the number that I've heard is something like 6 million German Americans in the United States. And so logistically and politically, they were just too large of a population to consider. The Japanese American community in Hawaii was recognized as being vital to the war effort. There was a majority minority, if you will, in terms of the population, the demographics, and because they had a commander there that recognized the cost of the war effort, of the logistics of transporting thousands of persons to the mainland. So those, even though there were ideas about proposals to remove Japanese from Hawaii, it was not seriously considered, and those ideas were faded away. There were Japanese Americans and Japanese aliens that did end up in the camps on the mainland, both in the alien internment centers that were for non-citizens, for the aliens that were under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice and the Army, and some did find their way for whatever individual reasons into the war relocation camps as well. So there were some that did experience incarceration on the mainland. Let's see, there was one more that came in. I am not familiar with Tom Kaufman. I'll be sure to look that up. Any other comments from our esteemed cast?
Well, thank you for having us with us for this event, and I hope that your book does very, very well. We're very proud of you.
Well, it's wonderful to have the support, especially of the organizations that my friends here represent. And we appreciate you joining us today. Again, express gratitude to the USC Ito Center for presenting this event. And thank you all for joining us.